Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the RK Leadership Podcast, where we empower tomorrow's leaders through the sharing of knowledge, experience, and inspiring stories. I'm your host, 𝐃𝐨𝐧'𝐭, and my very special guest today is Chris Waldron. He's the founder and CEO of Executive Accountability Coach. And before I pass it on to him, I wanted to take this moment to say thank you very much, Chris, for being on the show with me this morning, and I greatly appreciate your time. And on to you.
Well, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me on here. If you want my intro here, my name is Chris Waldron. I am an executive accountability coach. I've been a professional coach for almost 7 years now. I have previously, before that, I've built 10 companies. I've sold 4 of them. I started when I was 20 and I sold my first at 24. And then for the last 7 years, I got pulled into professional coaching because I had a unique blend of both experience and coaching ability, which is rare. And it's been pretty amazing. I work with founders, CEOs all around the world. About half of them are domestic here in the North America, not just the US, and the other half are international. And I have the greatest job in the world. I get to work with the most interesting people on very difficult projects and, help them basically realize their dreams for their companies and their personal lives.
Awesome. Now, Chris, you just mentioned that you've built 10 companies. I want to ask you, what is the biggest lesson you've learned from building those 10 companies? What's the biggest lesson you learned out of that?
I love that question. I have I think an interesting angle of an answer for that. It's no one thing. For me, it's always been a matter of the will to just stay in it. It's so difficult these days. People get on the internet and think that, one click away and you can build a business, or someone has the answer or blueprint, or, a bad day means it's all over. If you have no progress, you suck.
Yeah.
And just the willpower to understand that these things are going to be hard and you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days and it's going to be a roller coaster. And just staying in it. And of course, I don't mean if you've got a bad business that doesn't make sense, don't stay there and take it to the bottom.
That's right.
But just staying at it. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're building a business, and in my realm now that I'm expanding into, even if you're, a career executive and you're trying to make it to the top or succeed and go higher up the chain there, knowing where you're going and just staying at it for a long period of time is a skill in itself. And I think the interesting thing there is it's a learnable skill. So people believe that's, someone is just born with this. And it's no, we all started the same, didn't know how to eat, didn't know how to speak, right? We were taught and trained these things and we can unlearn things and get back there. Everybody has the ability to shift to that with a certain amount of conditioning over time. Your journey might be longer than others, but that is something that everybody can build, is that willpower to stay in and be consistent with anything that they're doing or trying to achieve.
That's right. So I like how you talked about that, Chris. We all do have our shitty days, shitty weeks, shitty months that really impact us. So what would your advice be to especially the younger generation out there who are just starting up? They want to see results very fast, very quickly. What would your advice be to them? I know you say stay in the game. How would you go about doing that? From a mindset even perspective.
Yeah, I think 2 things there. One being patience, right? Having the patience that nothing, yes, especially the iPad generation.
Yeah.
Not to put anybody down, alphas and Gen Zs. But I get it. I'm in the millennial generation, I think, according to some gauges. I grew up with a computer when I was, coming of age, not necessarily a tablet, but we had TVs and things like that too. And it's all instant gratification, and patience is a big thing. I think the other really important thing that's not often talked about is something that comes from Tony Robbins that it's always been a tool that I deploy in a state like that. And I also hand it out to others. That's if you're feeling bad about your progress or yourself or how things are going, the number one thing you can do in that moment is trade your expectation for appreciation. And I remember 7 years ago I went to a big Tony Robbins event in San Jose, California. And I remember hearing that. And I have a buddy who worked for him for a very long time, who's the one that invited me out. And I remember hearing that and being like, number one, I get it now on Tony Robbins, right? Like he has figured out how to make these things into tools, which is fantastic.
Yes.
But that stuck. There was two that stuck with me. That was one that stuck with me very heavily because you can do it in an instant, right? And that's his point, is like trade your expectation for appreciation. Your life will change instantly in front of your eyes, right? And the example I always give to the older generation, right, is, you expect to come home and your wife makes dinner every day and you come home one day and dinner's not on the table. You're instantly frustrated, right? And you're going to take that out on your partner, your teammate. And it's like, wait a minute. The only reason that you're upset is because you built an expectation rather than appreciation that like you have the ability, you have a spouse that'll do that. And if you grab yourself in that moment and reframe that whole situation and say, why can't you just appreciate that? Yeah, 1 day out of 5, 4 days, you had a hot meal when you came home from work, or whatever the translation to the Gen Zs and Gen Alphas would work like that. Too far from that now to give a really good example. But it's insane. It'll immediately shift your mindset. And that's what you need. You're not going to get great results. You're not going to solve problems in the states that you created them. You're not going to get great results in poor states. So if you're frustrated, that's not the state that you have to stay in or going to stay in if you're going to get the outcome that you want. You have to have a tool to pop in on yourself, grab yourself and say, hey, I'm not going to go anywhere in this mindset. Let me get out of it, and then sit back down, refocus, and get back to it.
That's right. And I love that example that you use with the spouse coming home and the dinner piece. And if we translate that into the office space, and I talk about this all the time with people, and leaders, managers, whatever you wanna call them at the time, we always see things. So somebody can be doing something right 10 times, but that one time that they do it wrong, you call them out and you reprimand them for it. And nothing kills morale and motivation and confidence than by doing that. And I love how you turn that from expectation to appreciation. Appreciate the 10 times that they're doing it, and you can talk to them about the one time, but don't be blind about the 10 times that they're doing something good and just ream them out for the one time. Right.
I totally agree. And even if it's a situation, because I could imagine there's people listening going, well, I have to, right? Because this is a serious thing. Totally understand, right? There are certain things you have to correct. But what about in that moment, first delivering the appreciation, right? Hey, I know you usually nail this, but today this didn't go so right. We need to fix it. Could that at least make someone feel first that they've been recognized, that they're understood? Everybody's going to make a mistake. But as you said, if there's a lot of leaders out there that are like, well, I don't want to coddle employees, I'm not that type of person. It's like, you don't have to be. You don't have to be continually. But it does have to come in somewhere. Nobody shows up to work saying, oh, I'm going to do a horrible job today. Nobody goes, I'm going to make sure I make a mistake today that gets me in a hot seat, because I definitely want to be grilled, by my manager, supervisor, the CEO, whoever it is for that person. Nobody does that.
That's right.
It's like, how would you want to be treated? I'm a huge fan of lead with empathy, right? And yes, we need to get results out of people, but we are still dealing with humans.
Yeah.
And until we're only dealing with robots, which would entail that we're also robots, you do have to have a layer of empathy, whether you come from that and that's natural to you or not. It needs to be injected. And if you're not the type of CEO that has that, then put someone in charge of those people that does, because it's important to build great teams, especially accountable teams. In my world, that's a huge topic.
That's right. Absolutely. So Chris, before I go further, I want to go back and take you back to your journey. And again, with the 10 companies you helped build, what did you learn about yourself the most? And why did you decide to get into coaching?
So first question, what did I learn about myself the most? I'll tell you, it's challenging even to say this, but the amount of times that and I say we because it's a common trait. So actually, let me switch that. I'm going to take responsibility. The amount of times that I went into self-serve mode when things get hard, you're never going to get results there. It's the easiest place to go, right? All of our emotional needs are met when we start self-loathing, right? We get significant. We feel like people will pay us attention. We get to feel bad about ourselves. It's easy. It's comfortable. And it gets us absolutely nowhere. And everybody has that experience. Everybody's been through. There's very few people, and let's be honest, maybe that's only the videos that they make where they say, "Oh, I'm on point every time." The amount of times you go into self-serve mode has to be reduced to do hard things, because you're just not going to get very far. And about 10 years ago was like that turning point where I've spent probably six figures on personal development over the past 10 to 12 years. Learning, and I don't mean I was that bad off, but when you start learning, you start realizing the power of understanding human psychology and human emotions, and not only how it benefits you first as a leader, but everybody else, and how you can help others. It's wild, the impact. And to the point now where, like I said, one of my role models is like a Tony Robbins, that if you can deliver that message so well that someone will remember that for years and years and utilize it in their life, you've achieved the peak, of that position in life and your peak level of impact. And I can proudly say I have people that call me years later that I've only talked to once or twice. One was even yesterday that said, like, you said this to me years ago and it stuck with me, and I drove this thing and I built this thing. And I was like, what did I say? It's like, what did I say? I can't remember everything. But that to me is unbelievable. I don't like taking credit for other success. That's actually an easy way to tell when people are kind of a falsehood, is they're trying to take credit for other success. But as a coach, the best feeling in the world is knowing that you've worked your message into a simplicity and into a way of wording that sticks with somebody and they can utilize it in the future, and it helps them better their life or get closer to their goals or whatever it is. So that was a huge journey. That's ultimately how I got into coaching as well. So leading that into your second question of how did I get pulled into coaching, as I was working at that time, it was a CPG, a consumer product goods company. So it was a company that I built. I actually had two at the time. I had a very close friend who I was calling pretty regularly. And I remember one specific day, I gave him a piece of advice with his company about how to change a few things. And he was like, this sounds dumb. And I'm like, just give it a shot. And it was about partnering with a public company that was basically a competitor. And I said, just try and see what happens. Well, lo and behold, he goes, and he's an amazing executor. He talks to them within the next week, their CEO. They package their things together. 2 months later, he tripled the revenue of his business. And then a year later, actually just sold to them outright. And at that time, I was also doing that pretty routinely with other colleagues. And I say colleagues, other entrepreneurs that were building businesses. And I remember when you start hearing, you need to do this, you need to do this, my first go-to is always no. Right? That's how some of us are with an ego, right? Don't tell me what to do. And I was hearing that the latest, the current version of that is everybody's like, you need to write a book. And I'm like, no. And I'm like, 2 years from now, I'll be writing a book. I know it. I heard that so much and so authentic, not authentically, genuinely from people that were like, so many people need somebody that not only has experience, but knows how to coach. And that meaning the difference there being, I'm not just taking my business experience and assuming that it applies in every situation. And now I'm going to coach you on what I did. That doesn't work. That's not what a coach does.
That's right.
A coach understands a person and how to move them forward in their own unique situation. That's a different skill set. That's a different talent. That's what separates coaches from phenomenal coaches, is the ability to actually coach. The Phil Jacksons, if you know, the late 1980s, Chicago Bulls coach. And I'm sure there's plenty others. That's what separates, the good from the great, or even the common from the great, is those two unique abilities. So that's how I ultimately got into coaching. And it's been a wild ride ever since.
Amazing. That's a great story. And Chris, we talk about coaching and, you know, the requirements of the coaching, and you talked about the ego just right now, and you've been working with a lot of executives. How do you get at that level people to kind of um, submit to themselves to say, hey, you know, I need some help. I need coach, because at that level, as I can imagine, and you know, some people have, you know, those bloated egos, and they say, I can do everything. That's why I'm here. That's why I've
Mhm.
achieved that stuff. How do you break that down to say, hey, there's more that I can do. There's more to learn. There's more to learn about myself. How do you penetrate through that?
You know, it's interesting, and I don't think this will be a favorable answer, but I don't.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, you can't help somebody that doesn't want to be helped.
There you
It
go.
could, it could, it could look, you could want the world for a person.
That's right.
If they don't want it, it doesn't matter. And at the end of the day, I don't want the responsibility of it anyways,
Yes.
right? If you have traits about you that need to be changed, but you don't see them, I mean, I could be the guy that falls on the sword and tells you, it's never going to go well, especially in a high ego situation. But at the end of the day, it's not my responsibility to change the world.
Hmm.
But if the world wants to change, I'm here and ready.
Amazing.
And that's the way that I look at it. It's not about me, it's about that person, and ultimately if they realize they're not getting the results, or if they realize, and let's be honest, there's only two ways things change on a fundamental level. You either have a significant and emotional event, right, or you understand and do things with discipline, right? So someone
Yeah.
has the desire and they go after it and they change things. Or the most common is the significant emotional event, that something happened. You got fired because you were so terrible with your employees, or
Yep.
your numbers were so bad, or your spouse left you, or the alcoholic gets in a really bad accident, right? And
Yep.
that emotional event that says, if you don't change, your life is going to be more painful than it is staying the same. And that's the moment that time comes available. And as a coach, as a professional coach, I can't pursue somebody in that avenue, right? They ultimately, just like when I get on calls with people and discovery calls, learning about them, I tell them all the time, like, this isn't about selling you, because I don't want that. It's not about me convincing you of anything.
That's right.
If you need the help and I'm the right tool, you'll know, and this will work. And that's how it's going to work the best. And that's what's going to be useful for my time and useful for that person's time.
That's right. You got it. Absolutely. And one thing that differentiates you from the rest of the crowd, Chris, that I've seen is, I want you to tell the audience, with respect to, there's a leadership coach, there's your traditional coaches, and then you've got your accountability coach. So can you dive a little deeper into that and tell us what you really do?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a unique label, but it is at least one someone understands, right? A lot of my experience, obviously, is in starting and building companies and growing them. But if you label someone a business coach, you're in a world of confusion, right? There's a lot of different levels. I work with people in all different types of industries, because we go basically to the core of the business. It's not about the unique. I'm not here to tell you which advertising works best for your specific company. There's people that can give you plenty of options in each realm. Um, the number one thing on both the entrepreneur and founder side and also the executive side that I have seen as a challenge, not only over every company that I've built, but in every client that I've worked with, including themselves and also their staff, is the ability to be accountable and consistent over time, right? Both ends. The individual, them being accountable to their staff, themselves, being consistent over time with it, and also building teams out that are accountable for their work and consistent with their work over time. Those are two massive challenges that over time we worked with and worked with. And I'm not going to say there's a perfect formula, right? So I'm not out here to be like, I've got a 6-step formula
Yeah,
to solve the problem. All the problems are solvable. And generally the approach is unique in each case. There are some commonalities, but that's why I use that term versus, say, executive coach, where I'm going in and doing 360 reviews and things like that. And just suggesting is, I'm here to get, and the easiest way that I say this, Rob, is I turn amateur founders into professionals.
nice.
right? Everybody gets, there's no blueprint for this. There's no instruction. There was no class that we took. You get in this year, you're like, I'm lost. I'm just doing my craft. And it's like, there's no structure. There was never a training of like, how do I do this consistently? How do I stay accountable? How do I build and find the right culture
That's right.
of people that are going to be accountable for their work, and they're going to know what they need to do next, and they're going to be effective. It's hard to get. You piecemeal, everybody piecemeals it and makes it work.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
So I just serve as a shortcut, especially over years of experience. I've coached now hundreds of founder CEOs, and executives. Executives about a third of it. So blending all of that experience together, the different personality types, there's a lot of similar patterns.
Yes.
You know, it creates a war chest,
Right.
essentially, to solve a problem.
Yeah, and you do see those patterns. So, Chris, you mentioned the CEOs and executives. Let's talk about the CEOs. As you start off as a CEO, you're starting your position as a CEO, you set out a vision. You even plaster it all over the walls and everywhere. And months down the road, that vision gets lost and the focus changes directions. How should CEOs ensure they're following their vision?
Oh, that's a great, easy tactical question. If you're getting lost from that, you haven't reevaluated. You haven't been touching it enough. We know a vision is a big overarching picture, right, of where we want to take this company. But like everything, it's a guess. We have to have a roadmap that we're following, right? And at the end of the day, if you're off track, right, and you're not going, where are we? Is this Kansas, right? Is this what street are we on? And we're just driving into the sunset. That's problematic, you know, especially for startup and growth stage companies. Like, you have to revisit that routinely, and even down to quarterly. What are you, if you are off track? Imagine how far off track your staff is that doesn't have the same level of involvement, doesn't have the same level of information that you do, can't see as far as you do into the future, right? What are they working on? I mean, can you even have an efficient workforce and an efficient team in that environment? No, you don't know what you're doing. They definitely don't know what they're doing, right? They're just working, answering emails, and passing the time.
That's right. Yes.
It has to be routine. It has to be consistent. It has to be routine. You can't forego it, at least if you want to get as far as possible in the least amount of time.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, that's a great point, Chris, because I see a lot of that. Again, it's fantastic to have those visions, like I said, posted on the wall. But people can also see that if you're not following that, you lose a lot of credibility.
Right? Yeah. That's a great point. It's like getting, you tell your kids, hey, don't, if you do that again, you're going to be in trouble, and they do it again and they're not in trouble. Right. You kind of lost credibility, right? Exactly. And it's like, yeah, guess what? There is no consequence, right? And that's accountability too, at the end of the day. If you're not, I'm not saying be the most rigid person in the world, but you do have to reassess. Things change, industry changes. COVID was a great, show of that. I'm sure everybody had very interesting visions, January 2020, that got upended just 60 days later.
Exactly. Well, you can, and you have to be open to revisiting that kind of stuff, replanning accordingly. But again, as a leader, it's so important to walk the talk. So you talk about this vision, mission, plan, or whatever that you have, walk the talk. And if you want to build that credibility with people, they're watching you all the time and they're listening to you. And when you steer off from that, they're going to say, okay, there's no credibility there. So why should I follow?
Yeah. Right? Yeah. If you don't believe it, why should I?
That's right. Exactly. So, Chris, in your opinion, why do some leaders lack that self-awareness?
Why do some leaders lack self-awareness? I mean, I think that's, a question that would be hyper personal to every individual. If you think about how we're built and how our programs are built in our minds, you're a product of every experience, decision, and ultimately your first 18 years of upbringing, right, is your core programming. And then every experience and decision you've made since then has built the program inside you. This isn't new and novel to me. This is known in the psychology world. Hopefully we're bringing this to a wider audience. If you lack self-awareness, well, number one, it's subjective, right? Does that person understand there's a problem in the first place? Or do they see what their version is a version of themselves that's the proper blueprint for success, right? Are they modeling someone that they saw their father or their mentor? Are they just playing out the same, leadership style, the same work ethic that someone else did, and they see that as correct? Then, I mean, ultimately, is that person self-aware? Whose opinion is it that they're not, right? And I don't mean to be too, off on the question, but I think the interesting thing is for everybody to understand that, like we mentioned earlier, that ultimately you have a set of programs and things can change whenever you want them to. And it starts with a simple decision, and like I said, for some, they might not gain that self-awareness until they have that event that shows them that the path they're on, or the way that they're acting, or the behaviors that they have aren't going to get them the results that they ultimately want. And that's going to be the point that they know they need to reevaluate, change. And generally that's going to involve getting an outside opinion, be it a therapist, be it, a doctor, be it a coach. Therapists go backwards, coaches go forward, right? Sometimes you do need to go backwards and understand. Other times you need to go forward and set the map out based on what you find. But there's a lot of tools. It's a matter of, knowing where they are and going and using them.
Absolutely. So again, part of self-awareness is self-reflection, right? So how often would you say people need to self-reflect at those kind of levels? Because again, I don't believe that it's there's a set amount of time. Like, what's your opinion on that?
My personal opinion, I journal almost every day. Part of it I do for work, but I do it myself as well. I started 6 years ago. And that was just a product of wanting to understand. And I started it in a very easy way. I didn't journal. I think when people bring up journaling, they bring up, oh, I need to talk about my feelings like I would a therapist in a journal. It's like, I'm not writing a journal that has a lock and heart key. That's not who I am. I started in a way that I just basically wrote through what happened, right? What happened that day. That's right. And I think that's the easiest way. In my opinion, obviously that was my way. I'm going to say it's the easiest because that's what I did. That was the easiest way to get started because I felt like I was capturing things. And these days it's easier with some of these AI dictation tools, right? The plot and these things you can just carry or have an app on your phone you talk into and then it summarizes. But I just started capturing and then, you read it, but you solidify the thoughts and the things that happened. You solidify the things that your brain encountered throughout the day, because otherwise, if you're just carrying this all around, everything gets mixed up, things get foggy. You don't actually fully remember. You could believe that exactly, what happened, or remember how something went, but you really don't know. And you certainly don't have a basis of something to track along with. Like you said, if I can see that I'm having a pattern of being extremely stressed out week over week, and I can see that in my writing, I'm not going to forget that. Like, that's not only have I crystallized it when I wrote it down, but I can see the pattern on paper and I can go, oh, something's wrong here, and did something change, or is, obviously something had to change, that's right. And I think that's a huge value to it. Some people call it journaling, logging, etc. But some way of reviewing. There's got to be a feedback loop that happens in your life if you want to get better at anything.
Correct. There's
absolutely got to be, if you're an athlete, if you're a business owner, there has to be a feedback loop somewhere that says, this is what happened. This is what we need to change. This is what we need to continue. And it needs to happen continually. Yes. Unless you want to stay the same. Absolutely. And for a lot of people, that's their answer. they want to stay the same.
Yes, exactly. And it's such a powerful tool, in my opinion. And, you talked about it. And I often say that it's not just putting negative thoughts on a piece of paper. You come to a point where you can actually start questioning yourself. You can come up with some answers. You brainstorm. It's like a sounding board in a way as well. Like, you're using yourself as a sounding board at times, right?
Yeah. It's an evaluation. I've done it. I do it. I don't write it anymore because my hands can't keep up with my brain. I do it. I type it. But actually, one of the easiest ways for me to capture, and again, there's even tools out that make it easier now. But I will open up my journal is in note-taking app Evernote, and use. I have a Google phone. I know everybody loves hearing that it's not an Apple phone. I hear about it 3 times a day. Google's voice dictation, and I'll go on a walk or
Mm,
something and just talk to it as if I'm talking to somebody.
that's right.
And somebody asks me like, what happened today? Like, how'd it go? And, conversationally, it'll just sit there and dictate it all out. And
Yeah.
it's like, I don't have to sit there for an hour typing these things out, structuring sentences. Like, I'm just talking into it. And at a minimum, I think for a lot of people, that emotional pressure release, same thing that you would go to a counselor or therapist,
Yes.
is already a great result that comes from that, right? It's just release all that every day so you don't deploy it somewhere else. But then you have data there. And maybe you don't need to read it for a little while, but it's stored there and it. You can feel confident that like I've got that
Yeah.
written somewhere and I can review it whenever I need to, where it's beneficial for me.
So yeah, one, it's a free therapist. That's one thing. The second is, I bet you have pretty much all of your content for your next book.
Oh, yes, that's how that came about. Between notes, client notes, and like my notes. Oh, there's more than enough material.
There you go. You gotta,
Yeah, I need a really good AI to translate my handwriting into text. That's the next challenge, and that's getting better and better. Hopefully, one day one will recognize mine.
Same here, Chris. So, Chris, I want you to talk to us about the importance of being intentional, and what does it really mean?
Oh, I love this question. You've done your research.
Yeah.
I love that. This is one of my favorite words. I think intention is one of the biggest thing. Outside of accountability, I think intention is one of the biggest things missing in people's day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
They might have heard the soundbite from some popular influencer on some show. Oh, be intentional. But your question is spot on. What does that mean? To me, in the business context, in the business world, or I mean, I guess even in the work world, right? It's what are you going to deliver this week, right? You have a lot of stuff going on. You're doing a lot of things. We get that. We know what your next emergency is. If you want to be a professional firefighter, go to any office in the US and Canada. Go anywhere. You can be a professional firefighter instantly as soon as you get there Monday morning. But if you want to make moves, if you want to make big changes, if you want to build big companies or do hard things or invent new products, you have to know where you're going. You have to be very intentional, even on a weekly or daily level, of what you're actually going to deliver. Because it's very easy to say, oh, my Monday's full with meetings and this and that. Okay, that's fine. But what are you going to deliver this week? Right? Like I could lose multiple weeks just doing task work. How do I prioritize based on that? Right? I don't. I respond to the most urgent thing that comes up. And that's where people get exhausted. That's where people get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
That's where people wind up with a statement that, I was busy last week, but I didn't get anything done. And you're like, how does that translate? And it's like, that's exactly where it is. There's no intention behind it. You were just working.
Right.
You're sitting at your desk, typing away, right? Or sending emails or standing behind a desk or whatever it is for that person. And nothing fundamentally got delivered that moves the needle forward for the business or the organization that you work within. Right. So with everybody I work with, one of the biggest things is every week we need to know what we're being intentional about. And there's a broader picture too, right? This just rolls into like life's sort of vision for each individual, right? What are you doing all this for?
Yep.
Is your life being lived on an intentional level in a macro view, right? In a large 30,000 foot view, right? Are you working and sacrificing time with your kids to something, or are you just doing it because you see others do it, or you think it's normal, or you think you have to? It's like, where are you actually going? What are you doing this thing for? You see that just lost on so many people, and that's why they're stressed and overwhelmed and frustrated, is because it just lacks intention behind what they're doing.
That's right. So here's another question for you with respect to that. So do you think people that are more authentic will be more intentional?
Do I think people that are more authentic will be? I think an authentic person could lack intentions. I think they could be authentic to themselves. I think being intentional is a skill set that you learn somewhere, right? Is to me, that means slowing down and understanding, basically the way that I've always explained it is putting the destination into your GPS. Yes. Right. I could be authentic. I could genuinely want to drive across town to see you, Rob. Yes. but being intentional is putting that destination in there and knowing I can
go.
get there the fastest way possible. If I get off track, it's going to realign me, right?
Yeah.
And in the context we're talking, that's what am I trying to achieve here, either in my life or this business or with this company that I've built? What are we actually trying to do? What are we trying to bring to market? You could be authentic. You could have a great product that you love and you know people love it, but you're just doing it,
Yeah.
right? And you're not very intentional about what you're doing, but you're seated and grounded in an authentic place, and you're doing something that you feel like is great for the world. You're just not, delivering it efficiently,
That's
right? And you're not being intentional about it. So to me, they don't necessarily correlate. But yeah, that's the way that I see it.
Amazing. I love that. Thank you so much, Chris. So we've reached our segment where I call rapid fire questions. So I'm going to be throwing some questions at you, and you give me the first thing that comes to your mind, Chris.
Okay.
You ready to go?
Let's give it a swing.
Awesome. So what is your number one advice to young leaders?
Have patience and make sure you're clear and intentional, as we just talked about.
Awesome. Excellent. What is your unconventional definition of leadership?
Unconventional definition of leadership. Oh man, that's a hardball question I would have to think about. The only answer that I could give that would be valuable is remember that you're dealing with humans. And if the number one way to gain rapport with any human is to understand and appreciate their world first. And if you can gain that, you can lead anybody. If they feel heard and understood, you can lead somebody.
Beautiful. I love that. That's my favorite, Chris.
Yeah, I don't know that's unconventional.
I think because it comes from you, it's not like a dictionary definition of it.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So what is the best advice you've ever received?
Again, those two Tony Robbins quotes. I didn't mention the other one. The other one that I have, I've had in my mirror for 10 years, is the past doesn't equal the future unless you live there.
I love that.
That was the other one besides the trade your expectations for appreciation and the world changes instantly. Those two pieces of advice have not only driven me, but I've then echoed out and hopefully have impacted others. I'm not the one that came up with them. I just echo them out. But wow, when you understand that, it's amazing. To me, that precludes that anything can change. Whatever you've happened to you up until this moment doesn't matter. We can't change it, but everything moving forward can absolutely be fundamentally different if you want it to be, and you make that decision.
That's right. And I love how powerful quotes can be in people's day-to-day life. So that's a good one too. So next question for you is, what is the most difficult emotion to control as a leader?
My answer to that would be stress. I would absolutely say stress. I think stress, when someone's not taking care of themselves, stress comes through, and that is an energy that sits with them and gets deployed on people that don't deserve it. And it is also a talent that you are ultimately responsible for managing that yourself as a leader, either of your household or of your company or of your team. You're responsible for managing your stress. And you've got to understand that people are looking up to you ultimately, and they don't deserve for you to put that on them. If you've created it and haven't managed it yourself.
Absolutely. You got it, Chris. And the last question is, where can people find you?
So at 𝐿𝐶hRWaldron.com, or I post frequently on LinkedIn. It's LinkedIn. It's at Chris Waldron 13. So WALDRON. And through there, obviously there's a page on my website about executive accountability coaching. And we're also, as of today, launching with another CEO coach from Copenhagen, Peter Sortenfrey, a cohort that's starting in August.
Nice.
For 12, there's 12 seats for executives that are basically looking at doing exactly this, getting a massive dose of clarity in their life, in their careers, understanding who they are, getting it set up, and then getting actually paired up with a peer executive at their same level to make sure that after those 12 weeks that they have a battle buddy to see that through, on top of having us there as well.
Amazing. Keeping each other accountable.
Yeah. It's huge. Network's a big part of your success.
Absolutely. Amazing. I want to thank you again, Chris, for joining me today, sharing your stories and your experience and your fantastic knowledge. I believe that, it's going to be very much appreciated by the folks listening out there. So thank you so much for spending this morning with me. And for all those out there who have questions for Chris, drop them in the box below. I'll make sure he gets it, or you can reach him directly, and I'll put his contact information on this post. So again, thank you so much, everybody. We'll see you on the next episode. Thanks a lot, Chris.